Okay, so for this video, what we're going to be looking at is a glaciated landscape in the UK as a case study or an example. We're going to be looking at the Lake District, and within the GCSE spec, what we need to know is the attractions to tourists in this landscape, and then the impacts of that tourism and the management of it. We're also going to combine this with another part of the spec, which looks at the idea of economic activities within a glaciated landscape. So we're going to combine that into the same case study. So really simple diagram, we've done this loads of times, we know you don't have to be an artist to do it. Quick title, Glaciated Landscape, the UK and the Lake District. And then our sort of background or our template for this diagram is going to be quite simple. We're going to have kind of two mountain ranges, or two mountain tops I should say. Okay. This is quite similar to our Boscastle case study diagram, which has two hills, which is why I'd make sure they're pointed with kind of like snowy peaks to remind us that it's a colder climate, glaciated landscape. So what we're going to do is, first off, we're then going to split this into three sections so that the left-hand mountain, the right-hand mountain, and then the valley all operate as three separate sections to our diagram. And what we're going to do first is we're going to have a look at the left-hand side, and this is where we're going to look at this idea of land use, or economic activities. So if we think about the potential economic activities in a glaciated landscape, we've got to remember it's going to be relatively challenging, okay, because of the climate and the terrain means that economic activities are not going to be as easily found as they are in perhaps lowland areas of the UK, but there is still lots of economic potential in these landscapes. So starting off with probably the most obvious one for somewhere like the Lake District is mining. Okay, particularly for things like slate. Okay, we're actually going to have a look at an example of how a slate mine in Honiston has adapted to try and increase its income over recent years. One of the other major economic activities is forestry. Okay, particularly things like evergreen conifer plantations. Okay, the climate works very well for those. Okay, and in the Lake District, we're looking at somewhere in the region of around 75,000 tonnes of timber being produced every year, which is then being sold to make for construction and furniture, for example. One of our other major economic activities is farming. However, because of the fact that the climate is obviously relatively cold in somewhere like the Lake District, okay, and there's high amounts of relief rainfall, the soils are generally not particularly high quality. They're normally referred to as a pod soil, which is generally nutrient poor. So kind of crop growing is not really a viable option. So most farming, okay, in the Lake District is known as fell farming, fells being a kind of word for hills, okay, and the fell farming basically focuses around sheep. Okay, this is my wonderful drawing of sheep, as you can see. Okay, particularly species such as the Herdwick sheep, okay, which are able to be tolerant, sort of adapted to sort of live in these tough conditions. They're able to walk on very steep slopes. They have very thick wool, okay, that keeps them warm even when it's incredibly cold. The problem is, because of the tough conditions, simply you're not going to produce as much as you would on a lowland farm. So generally we would say on average, those farmers in the Lake District earn somewhere in the region about half the annual income of their lowland farmers in places such as southern England. One of the other major sources of economic income for the Lake District is tourism. Again, so we're going to go into looking at this in more detail. This is my tourist, he's got a nice tourist hat on and a backpack, going for a walk. Okay, we look at around about 20 million tourists come into the Lake District every year, and in general, so stats, for example, back in 2017 and 2018, tourism basically produced about £1.4 million of income to the area for every year. Okay, what we do have to remember, however, is that a lot of those jobs that are created in tourism are going to be seasonal jobs. Okay, generally places like the Lake District are not going to be having a huge number of visitors during the winter months. Okay, so therefore most of the jobs are concentrated around the summer. Now, one of the major issues we have with a lot of these economic activities and these land uses is that they often come into conflict with each other. Okay. Now, to give you some examples of this, obviously tourism and mining can quite often come into conflict with each other. Mining is generally quite a heavy industry, normally involves a large amount of destruction to natural habitats and ruins views, which is obviously one of the major things that attracts the tourists. Okay, most of these tourists are going to be coming on hiking or walking holidays. They may be wanting to see some of the most spectacular scenery the UK has to offer, do water sport activities on some of the major lakes like Lake Windermere. They're not going to be too happy if their spectacular views are being ruined by a large mine, and obviously the congestion and dust and pollution that creates. Tourism and farming can often also come into conflict. For example, tourists walking on routes across farmers' fields can cause large amounts of footpath erosion, which can ruin the quality of the soil, but also they can leave gates open, allowing the herds of sheep, such as the herdwick, to escape out, which can obviously financially impact on the farmers. At the same time, forestry and farming don't always get on. Large areas of the Lake District have had compulsory land order purchases put onto farmers, where the land has been brought to from the farmers with little choice given to them to create areas for forestry. This is to help in reduction of flooding, but also to produce more timber for the area. So we can see that quite often a lot of these land uses do come into conflict with each other. However, there are attempts to reduce this conflict. So for example, the forestry and the tourism are trying to work closer together by lots of these forested areas now providing tourist and leisure activities such as Go Ape treetop runways, mountain bike courses and so on. We're also even starting to see the mines and tourism starting to work together. And a really good example of this is Honiston Mine, okay, which is a former slate mine in the Lake District. And what they started to do is actually offer guided tours of the mines, and they're quite famous for something called the Infinity Bridge, which is basically a wire rope bridge, okay, connecting one part of the mine to the other that people can walk across, and you have to be harnessed up. It's some of the most spectacular views the Lake District has to offer. So we are starting to see some of these economic activities trying to overcome this conflict with each other. Now, this is just a few examples. Some of the other land uses might be quite commonly used military use in the Lake District, so parts of the land being used for military training. Again, that has major conflicts with many of these other land uses, particularly tourism, as you're not really going to want tourists entering an area that is being used for mining. For military training. Going on to the next bit then, so we've looked at the land uses and economic activities. We're now going to really focus on this aspect of tourism as one of the major economic activities. As I said, over 20 million tourists a year visit the Lake District, bringing around £1.4 million of income annually. Okay, but we need to look at the negative impacts of that, or the problems of tourism. As we said already, some of the jobs, or the majority of the jobs involved in tourism, are going to be seasonal. This means that people are only going to be employed during the summer season, and therefore going to be having to look for other employment opportunities elsewhere. But if we start thinking about these problems of tourism then, okay, one of the major problems associated with tourism in the Lake District is footpath erosion. We already mentioned that as one of the things upsetting the farmers. Okay, but large amounts of walkers, okay, walking along paths and also walking on the areas of land surrounding those paths is causing the land to be eroded and worn away. We also have a huge amount of congestion in the Lake District due to the high number of tourists. You think you've got 20 million people coming a year. Most of those are going to be concentrated during the summer months. The Lake District, by its very nature as a national park, isn't going to have large roads. It's going to be small country roads with that amount of traffic on them, resulting in a huge amount of congestion, which is obviously going to disrupt local people's lives as they try and get to work and try and get around. One of the other major issues has been the increase in house prices. Okay, due to second home ownership increasing rapidly in the Lake District. Many people from other parts of the UK city life, wanting a break at the weekend, are buying homes in the Lake District, use holiday homes in the summer as weekend getaways. And this is really pushing the prices up in the Lake District. Because it's a national park, there is restricted building. As a result of that, there can't be huge amounts of new housing being built, so there's a very limited housing market or supply. That means that the more and more those that get bought up, those that do come on the market are in higher demand, and therefore the prices can be increased. Now, you might argue that's a good thing for somebody looking to sell the home, but if you're looking to buy into the Lake District, if maybe you're a first-time buyer or a young buyer wanting to stay near to family, much of the housing is simply unaffordable. Also, this has massive economic impacts for surrounding businesses. If you think about some of our small Lake District villages, if many of the houses there are owned by second owners and holiday owners, then for much of the year those houses are going to be empty. Okay, so for example, in November, in the middle of the week, the chances are somebody actually going to stay in their second home is incredibly low. They're likely to only stay there in the weekend or during the summer. That means that businesses, for example, local shops and pubs that rely on local trade, aren't getting that trade because the houses aren't being occupied for the majority of the year. One of the other final issues, and this focuses particularly on the lakes, such as Lake Windermere, is that the water sport activities and the number of boat rides that go on it are causing huge amounts of bank erosion. The wake that those boats create, the wash from behind them, is hitting into the banks, eroding them and destroying those habitats and locations on the side of the lakes. So what we need to have a look at then is how can we manage these problems of tourism? What can be done in the Lake District to reduce the negative impacts that tourism can create, because it is massively beneficial if it can be managed. As we said, £1.4 million to the economy every year cannot be ignored, but we need to try and limit these problems here. So if we kind of work our way through these and look at how they're trying to do them, one of the ways that they're trying to reduce the bank erosion and the destruction to the habitats on the banks of the lakes, such as Lake Windermere, is to impose 10-mile-per-hour speed limits on boats operating on the water. This obviously reduces the amount of wash that the boat creates, which then means that the banks are less likely to be eroded. However, it's come under a huge amount of criticism from water sport activities and enthusiasts who say that their businesses are suffering. For example, if you were offering speedboat journeys, water skiing and so on the lake, not being able to go over 10 miles per hour basically completely destroys your business. So there has been a lot of criticism of that as a strategy. In terms of the congestion or the traffic issue, the Lake District has been investing in a system that they refer to as called the Go Lakes scheme. And the Go Lakes scheme is basically a bus service. It's cost them quite a staggering amount of money, around £7 million. But the idea behind the Go Lakes is that it's a hop-on, hop-off tourist bus. So it will take you to the major sites of the Lake District, and you can get on and off it whenever you want. You buy a day's ticket, and if you're arriving at these places on the Go Lakes scheme, you quite often use your bus ticket for evidence and therefore get a discount to admission to some of the major attractions. The idea is that this will then encourage people not to bring their own cars or not be driving their own cars around and reduce the levels of congestion subsequently. In terms of the footpath erosion, we have a strategy called Fix the Fells. Now this is a project run by the National Park with help from volunteers, and what they do is they are attempting to reduce footpath erosion by laying local stones on some of the most popular footpaths. This will encourage people, they say, to stay to the major footpath rather than walking on the side of it as it's kind of stoned. And also it's meant to look or sort of attract and fit in with the natural scenery as they use local stones rather than using concrete or tarmac, so it's not ruining the appearance of the national park. This has worked to a certain degree, and where it has been installed, the Fix the Fells strategy has reduced footpath erosion by encouraging those people and tourists to stay on the footpath and providing that kind of layer of protection to the soil. However, it's an incredibly time-consuming and expensive process to do. Because they're using local materials and wanting to keep a natural appearance, they can't just lay tarmac or concrete, which would be much cheaper. So we're looking at costs in the region of around £140 per metre. As a result of that, Fix the Fells of having to focus on the more populated parts, which means footpath erosion does still occur on large areas of the Lake District. In terms of the housing problem then, what has been put in place is that in certain areas of the Lake District, not all of the areas, but in certain tourist hotspots, there's been a scheme put in place where you have to prove that you have been a resident of the Lake District for at least 3 years before you can purchase a home. This is to stop people buying them as second homes and to allow locals access to the market. Now, this has been beneficial, as I said, to local people that are now able to access the housing market because there are houses set aside for those. But there has also been criticism from homeowners who are saying that the market that they have available to sell to is being limited by this, and therefore they're not able to get what they feel is the true value of their property. So there we go. There's our case study diagram, okay, for a glaciated landscape in the UK. We've got our land uses and our economic activities, the problems that our major economic activity or tourism creates, and some of the ways that we're trying to manage that.